Welcome to IP Goes Pop, your source for exploring the interface between intellectual property and pop culture. The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com. This program should not be considered legal advice. Please consult an attorney for your specific situation. And now your hosts, intellectual property attorneys, Michael Snyder and Joseph Gushue.
Greetings and cheers, listeners, and welcome back to IP Goes Pop. Joe, hello again, and welcome back.
Hi, Mike. Great to be here, recording another show with you. I think we got a great topic and a very interesting guest joining us also.
And before we bring in our guest, good segue into the topic. The topic is, or the title of this week's podcast is If the Shoe Fits, and the topic is actually sneakers and how sneakers and pop culture intersect. Sneakers have become a huge part of popular culture. We'll go fairly far back in the history of sneakers, but it was the 80s when these sneakers really became pop culture icons. Before we get there, I do want to say this podcast is entertainment only. It is not legal advice. If you need legal advice, please seek out an attorney. And with that disclaimer, I want to bring in our guest. We're very lucky to have him. He has such an interesting background. We're going to hear about it today. This is Dan McKinnon. Dan, I want to give a little bit of your background. Right now, you are Chief Executive Officer of Proof Authentication, PROOF. And you could tell us a little bit about that. What's interesting is Proof is actually a great name for a company. We should have had you on the branding episode with that name, but you also previously were head of global brand protection for New Balance, the shoe and sneaker company, which we will absolutely get into today. Dan, hello and welcome.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me. This is I'm excited to be here. This is my first podcast, so I'm excited to give it a whirl.
Now, can you just tell us a little bit about what your current company, Proof Authentication, does?
Sure. Proof was formed sort of out of the fact that I was the head of brand protection for New Balance. And while there, we always had to deal with counterfeit product. And I always had a frustration that the technology that was embedded into the product just didn't work the way I wanted it to work. And so when we came upon a real new technology that is able to authenticate items, doesn't have to be sneakers, it can be anything. Some of our clients are like pharmaceuticals and automotive parts and baby formula. It was just something we had to snatch up. And so I grabbed a group of people, tapped the shoulders of a couple of venture capitals. And next thing you know, we put it together, we acquired the technology, and we're off and running. We got some great clients.
Please make sure to bring that into our discussions today too, but it's also for us really exciting, the experience you have, particularly for this topic this week with sneakers and one of the most well-known brands in the world. And we've already, I will say, listeners, you're in for some really interesting things about counterfeiting. But before we get there, I want to set the table a bit and talk about sneakers in popular culture. And I want to go all the way back maybe to one of the earliest and most well-known ones. And that would be the Converse Chuck Taylor All-Stars. I think everyone is familiar with these. People might have an experience with these. I know that my daughter and my daughter's group to this day will get multicolored Chuck Taylor, for Chuck Taylor All-Stars for every occasion. I know that, and Joe, maybe you could think of a couple of these. Any basketball movie set in a certain era, the entire team will be wearing the Chuck Taylor canvas, the whole Hoosiers team or Hickory.
I went good call there, Mike. Yeah, I went back and looked at Chuck Taylor when it started, when Converse released the shoe. So it turns out it's from 1917 with the All-Star being released. And then Chuck Taylor, being a basketball player, complained of sore feet They gave him the All-Stars to wear, and then he became a brand ambassador for the next 40 or so years, traveling around the basketball clinics and selling shoes out of his trunk, which is very similar to what happened with the founding of Nike and track. But I was just surprised that people wore these shoes to play basketball for around 50 or so years until we had sort of this revolution of an explosion of new shoes coming on the scene. Because as I've worn them, I cannot imagine playing basketball in them.
It is almost a challenge to your ankle to not get sprained. And people wore them forever. And actually, famous stars that we see, if you look at the history of the NBA, famous stars who were wearing them to do much more acrobatic things than I am capable of on the basketball court.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you and I, huge NBA fans, and it's amazing how popular the Converse brand was for the first half century of the league there, almost without a competitor. Everyone was wearing some sort of Converse shoe. And it's now definitely more stylistic than functional. And I think we could go into that with some of the other Converse shoes that were released over time with the early 80s, I guess, moving us up to Larry Bird and Magic Johnson wearing.
And you know what? I do want to make one point, though. Although a lot of this, the background here on the sneakers and pop culture are sports related, I will say that it's hard to picture Joan Jett from the Joan Jett era, the Black Hearts era, or the Ramones without without these Chuck Taylors. So it is also kind of a rock and roll look, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
There is one competitor that was out there that actually predated them, and I know it quite well. It was owned by New Balance at the time. It's PF Flyers, made famous a lot of times by the movie Sandlot.
Oh, sure, of course.
But their slogan was run faster, jump higher in your PF Flyers. Well, PF Flyers was our lifestyle rival to Converse, and if you want to get into the legal machinations of that, it was a long, drawn-out battle between us and Converse, who was trying to basically trademark the design and the look and feel of the Chuck Taylor. And the only one who could step in was us, because our look and feel is almost identical to theirs, and we predated them. So it was a real interesting legal battle.
I'm actually picturing the Sandlot now, and it is definitely one of, it's part of the era, let's say, of that look of that movie.
Totally.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit. By the way, a little bit about why Dan's the perfect guest on this particular podcast and episode. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit, and it's still Converse again, and this is the Converse weapon. And if you were a sneakerhead in the 80s, you will know about the advertising campaign of the Converse weapon, Choose Your Weapon. It was Bird and Magic. Of course, there were some other, after that, a lot of other NBA players joined on. But interestingly, if you get a chance, and I think it's in the 30 for 30 of Bird and Magic. I don't know if it's Bird and Magic or Bird. I guess it depends on where you're watching the show. But they explain how, they always had this rivalry and their careers always paralleled. But it wasn't until they had to get together for this sneaker commercial for these weapons that they really met each other. And Joe, I don't know if you ever got to see that, or if you know of where they actually bonded and it became less, Lakers Celtics and more just two people who love basketball and love their jobs.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know so much about that, Mike. I'm curious to hear Dan's take about that, if he has any experience.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you're going back now. So that was my heyday, mid 80s. And I had a pair of the weapons. Obviously, I had the Birds, being from the Boston area. I mean, wouldn't dare wear the Lakers ones, the Magic Johnson ones. But you're right. Then they started spinning them out after that, and it was like, like a green one. I think it was Mark Aguirre had one. I think Converse might have run a little short on the sponsorship money. Oh, they went from Bird and Magic, and then it started going down pretty fast after that.
Well, Dan, if you're from that same era where, this is kind of my main era of sneaker purchasing, and I don't know if it was collecting at the time. I think today it would be collecting. We actually wore our sneakers back then and didn't keep them in a box in the closet, but you really needed a whole slate of NBA players to make your brand at the time.
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, and then you had different brands in there at that era. I mean, you were talking with like, Spud Webb winning the dunk contest. You had the ponies. I mean, where do you see ponies anymore? I don't even know. I think that there was a slight revival of them about 5 to 10 years ago. They were bought by some private equity company, but I think the thing fizzled. So, there was a tonic. The tonic was sponsored Akeem Olajuwon. I mean, there were some randoms up there. Like,
Yeah. Were there? How about I remember Ruse.
Oh yeah, kangaroo.
ROOS, kangaroos, and I think they had Clyde Drexler for a short period of time. And by the way, I do want to say my number one, when I was playing in the schoolyards of West Philadelphia, my number one sneaker of all time was the New Balance James Worthy. I'm not just saying this for the podcast. The New Balance James Worthy P740. You could look it up, do a Google image search, take a look. Best basketball sneaker I ever had.
We relaunched that sneaker, I want to say about 3 or 4 years ago, just prior to our making I keep saying ours. I was at New Balance for 15 years, so I still consider it family.
Sure.
But when we relaunched the James Worthy, we had to reach out to him. We had to sort of re-endorse it. It was a little bit of a process, but it's great. It's like a retro throwback. So you can buy that exact shoe right now. It was probably made maybe, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago.
Well, my family is asking for my holiday wish list. At least looks like I'm going to exit this podcast with number one on the wish list, because I had no idea that I was about to go on eBay. And by the way, speaking of iconic sneakers, and I did have to go on eBay for the Vince Carter Tai Chi's, which he won the slam dunk contest in. If anybody remembers, that was, and won for a while, was on the scene. And just a little segue of slam dunk contests. If you were either an NBA fan or a basketball fan, in 1991, you may remember D. Brown of the Boston Celtics pumping up his Reebok pumps right before each of his slams in the slam dunk contest that year.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember that like it was yesterday. There's an interesting story there too. It has to do with the fact that I guess Nike had the pump in the works for quite a while, and Reebok got wind of it and basically threw it together faster and got it to market faster, and sort of stole the thunder of Nike on the pump. Because if you look back, you'll see that Nike had a much less successful version of the pump shoe, because it required an external pump, and you would stick it in the back of the shoe, and it was real awkward and goofy looking. And so I guess we'll say that's one victory for Reebok over Nike. So they should savor the flavor.
I actually did have, I don't know if it was Reebok or Nike now. I have to look at it. I had a David Robinson, the Admiral. He had a pump sneaker, but it might have been, I'll have to look it up now, but it didn't work exactly the same way. And I did get accused of having a fake pump. So I'm thinking that it was not the Reebok. But in my research, I did also find, I wondered about the Kobe line, because now you will see, I would say the majority of NBA players, where they're actually on Twitter mentioning their sneakers, or, there's a sneakerhead website mentioning their sneakers. Kobe got off to a very rocky start in the sneaker world. And if you look back, he signed with Adidas, and there's an Adidas Kobe 2. And if you could find it, I'm actually going to post a link to the picture with the show notes. It looks like either a toaster. Does anybody remember these? They're almost space age looking.
I do remember these, Mike. That'll be good in the show notes. Everyone should take a look at the launch of Kobe's early sneaker. His brand sneaker. It's definitely come a long way, because in NBA circles now, all the NBA players want Kobe's. It's a very desirable shoe for them to wear. And at the same time, there's an issue with Kobe Bryant's estate and Nike, and these shoes are becoming increasingly rare as that sort of issue between Kobe's estate and Nike gets ironed out, to see what's going to actually happen to the Kobe shoe.
there's another big difference now, at least with the modern world of sneakers, where you can get them in these unbelievable, pretty much any custom color combination. It seems like they must just send them to the players separately every game. And I remember how hard it was to choose the color combination of the sneaker. You know, you saved up, you're going to get your Air Jordans or your James Worthies, and you had to pick a color combination, and you better like that color combination, because if you got the Lakers color combination, that was it. You were a Lakers fan, no matter what. Now they happen to have won in the 80s, which was a good color combination to have. But if you picked another color combination, who knows? Finally, in the pop culture world, I wanted to talk about the movie that was centered on sneakers, and it's a movie from 2002, Like Mike. Anyone familiar with the movie Like Mike?
Oh, yeah.
A little Bow Wow.
So for our listeners who aren't familiar, this was a movie about a kid who finds a pair of discarded Michael Jordan sneakers. I think they were in the North Carolina blue and white color combination, and receive all the basketball powers, if you will. It's your classic superhero origin story. He finds the sneakers, he gets super basketball powers. And this starred sorry, I almost said Little. It's Lil Bow Wow, who is now Bow Wow. He's actually great in the movie. This was a fun kids movie. And interestingly enough, while Allen Iverson and Dirk Nowitzki and Chris Webber and Jason Kidd and Steve Nash were all in the movie, guess who didn't even make an appearance in the movie or get mentioned? Michael Jordan did not appear in the movie about sneakers. He's the Mike in Like Mike.
Unreal.
So a little bit of trivia. And now let's, what we really want to talk about today are, Dan, you have this unbelievably deep, depth of knowledge in the world of counterfeiting, which really is, if you think about it, the world of sneakers. You really can't consider sneakers without having an understanding of counterfeiting. And when we spoke about, bringing you onto the podcast, you had some really interesting stories and just kind of an explanation of what the world of counterfeiting is like for sneakers. So if you don't mind kind of bringing us back or telling us some of your experience there, because it's not only is it incredibly interesting, but it's kind of never stops.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was just a regular old trademark attorney hired by New Balance who, was there to do their trademark prosecution work. And as the brand got more and more successful, and we sort of caught fire, and it started out in China with one of our styles, our 574 style, just became wildly popular. And, we went from a $1 billion a year brand sort of revenues to, close to 5 billion. And with that came a huge flood of counterfeits. And so, who else is going to deal with this issue except for me, right? So I'm the trademark attorney. Essentially, a counterfeit at its source is a trademark infringement. But it's you're dealing with it in a very different way when you talk about China. And so I ended up going to China at least 2 or 3 times every year. And before I left New Balance, it was nearly 100% of my job. It's just dealing with all of the counterfeit problems.
Now explain, when we say counterfeiting, how close or what would they do to try to change it, to make it different or somewhat different, or would they even try to make it different? How would someone experienced know the counterfeit? How could a consumer know the counterfeit? For example, I do know people who are, if they like a certain brand, from a block away, they can spot a quote unquote counterfeit by something about it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Just like anything else, that entire market, if you want to call it a market, I mean, it is a market. It's just an illicit market, evolved the way all of our markets have evolved. And when I first started there, the counterfeits were laughable. I mean, like you said, you could identify it from across the street. By the time I left there, if you didn't have really advanced technology built into the shoes, I mean, I took shoes down to, certain sneakers down to the designers themselves, and they couldn't tell the difference. I mean, the counterfeit sneakers in China are really, really good. And so, we had to evolve with that. We had to keep pace. We had to understand what was authentic and not. And as we started to make inroads and get more successful cases and victories here and there, you're right. They did. The counterfeiters got hip to it, and they leaned into the laws as they're written in China, and they found the loopholes, and so we started, having to fight against what we call parasite brand. I actually came up with the term because it's not technically a counterfeit, because you can immediately look at it and read it, and it doesn't say New Balance. It says New Bunrin or New Byland. I mean, it doesn't use the words New Balance. Outside of that, the shoes are identical. And so now you're having to make these sort of convoluted arguments before the court. And you can't enforce until you win. And then when you win, they appeal. And if you win the appeal, sometimes it goes to the Supreme Court. And with us, it did. You're talking 5-6 years per case. In the meantime, in China, they don't really stay decisions, right? They don't, it's not like something's, and so what ends up happening is they continue to make money over the course of the time. And by the time it's done, we'll receive an award of $2 million, but, they've made 150 million. So it happens all over again. It's pretty interesting out there.
So go back to those name changes. So they will literally take the same initials, and they would be able to have a sneaker that looks just like the New Balance sneaker, but with a different name that still has, the same initials as New Balance.
That's exactly right. So what they do is, the only way you could sort of protect against that would be with design patents. But the problem with design patents, when you're filing them, it becomes laborious because so many different styles of shoes get designed and made each year that it just doesn't make any economic sense. And you're constantly having to deal with it and flip them over. And also the way the patent system works in China is, all you got to do is file a patent, you get a patent, and then it only becomes truly valid when it's challenged. And then that's when the patent actually gets examined. It's not like in the States here where they're actually examining the patents. They have far too many to do it. So essentially, they're escaping you by just taking the trademarks that you have, altering them slightly. Like I said, instead of New Balance, it's New Byland or New Baron, and then just running with the sneakers. And so, ultimately, you look around, you see them on everybody's feet. They all look the same until you read the fine print.
So one thing you mentioned about, styles and design patents and things, when you're looking at a fast moving industry, such as, fashion, which sneakers are a part of, there's almost, there's a new model every year. There could be a new model every couple of months, actually, if it's moving quickly enough or the styles are changing enough. So, it makes sense what you said about design patents. By the time you file, even if you get a design patent quickly through the patent office, you're talking at a minimum a year to get it issued. Maybe the quickest one I ever heard was perhaps 9 months. And by then the style could have changed, or your brand may not even find it worthwhile to protect what is now an old style already by the time you get protection.
Well, that's exactly right. And then also you got to sort of step back and look at the difference and, get into the minutia, but there is a difference between a design patent and a trademark. And to use a design patent to try to sort of backdoor trademark protection doesn't really work. And the reason why it doesn't work, it comes down to the technicalities, is that, a trademark, you get the trademark, but then you have all the rights around it, right? Because the standard is likelihood of consumer confusion. So you have that wiggle room where you're like, well, is it similar enough? That standard isn't really applied to design patents. Design patents, especially in footwear, they're so narrowly construed that if they tweak the design just a little bit, then they escape sort of the protections of your design patents. So it doesn't really work the way you would even want it to work.
And I think, it's interesting. A few years ago, it was Crocs that really tried hard to push the pendulum back to the design patent owner, where, Crocs essentially have a bunch of circles, let's say, punched in the front of the sandals. And the infringers had used diamonds or triangles. Luckily, in that particular instance, the Federal Circuit said, no, you can't just get around it by, chaining a circle to a diamond. but some courts, do construe it narrowly, as you said, and I'm actually not sure how. You mentioned in China, there are ways to get patent protection in China very quickly with utility. It's called a utility application, and they don't get examined, but you do get protection, and it's something you have to deal with. I have a question. Do the counterfeiters themselves ever apply for protection of their brands in China? Of their parasite brand. By the way, Dan, we're going to be using parasite brand from now on. I know that you coined it. We will make sure that we, give you an attribution. I think it's the perfect term for what we're talking about, because they are essentially a brand clinging on to the soft underbelly of a popular brand.
Right, and they're literally sucking the lifeblood. They're gaining their life off of all the equity that you've established in your brand.
Yeah, but this podcast is getting very vivid. But go ahead, let's keep going.
It's dark. I mean, I thought it was a good one.
No, it's a great term. But I'm just wondering if what we're calling the parasite brands are themselves, so bold as trying to get their own protection.
Absolutely. I mean, it's. You got to take a step back. So the vast majority of this occurs in China, right? That's where it all originates. And that's where these parasite brands are. And in large part, we're sort of thankful for the culture here in the US, and that I don't see parasite brands ever really catching on here, because I think people would be, sort of embarrassed to be walking around with New Balance instead of New Balance, or Nukes instead of Nikes. And, it might be funny at one point, and there might be some sort of value there, but otherwise it's fortunate for us because it doesn't really catch on. But you're right. We opposed, at any given time, we had north of 1,000 trademark oppositions active in China.
That's I don't even know if I'd like to do some research and see how many the U.S. Trademark Office, how many actually oppositions they do in a year, let alone just for one, company's protection. That's a amazing workload. And did you use a monitoring system? Did you have people kind of set up on the ground there?
Sure. Yeah, we used various different law firms throughout China. One that really concentrated on the prosecution side of things, others that concentrate on the litigation side. But when it comes to oppositions and registrations, it's truly a game there. The ethos, the theory, the reason why intellectual property laws are established are all sort of lost, right? It just becomes get that trademark and then go out and sell your product. And so it's bizarre. I mean, there are so many, and then what ends up happening is, it's actually kind of interesting, is because there's so many registrations, because the cost is low. And again, you got to understand, in China, it's different than the US. When you file a trademark registration, federal registration in the US, you either have to be using it in commerce, or you have to file an ITU. You have to have an intent to use it in commerce. And you sign and you say, I've got an intent to use it in commerce. There's no such requirement in China. So you can just shotgun a million things. The cost is low. We oppose a million things, and then the cost is foisted upon us to cancel these marks. And it's just, the whole system is overrun.
So basically, it's instead of kind of a protection system, it's kind of an enforcement system where they put the onus on the owner or the enforcer to do something about it, and they actually don't have protections in place to protect you.
Absolutely. Very, very recently, they've just instituted a bad faith element to the registration of trademarks. Now, I say recently, it's probably about a year ago now in China. They may have always had it, but they increased the penalties for bad faith registration. So when you go to Counsel, if there's bad faith, and you can prove bad faith, excess damages.
So I guess, Dan, are you seeing companies using technology to their advantage to try to stop counterfeiting, where they'll do something to their product that's detectable, that can't be copied, in order to easily identify, the real one versus the parasite?
Well, it's almost a perfect setup for what we do here at Proof. But the answer is yes. And there's been authentication technology for a while in shoes. I mean, we've had it in New Balance shoes for a long time. But the problem is the first part of what you said. for consumers to easily be able to identify. And the truth of the matter is a lot of the technology that's housed in these products are not easy for the consumers to access. Like a good example is a lot of times they use what's called infrared taggants, which are tiny little flecks of material, essentially, that when you shine an infrared laser on them, they will illuminate. So it turns infrared, invisible light into visible light upon the reflection. Problem is nobody has an infrared laser, right? Only the brand has it and a few other people. And so what ends up happening is the brand can identify that the product is counterfeit, but nobody else can. And then there's been all sorts of attempts to allow consumers to do it with holograms and things like that. But the problem with those are the counterfeiters make really good holograms too. And while they're not quite at the same level as the authentic hologram, think about the time in which the actual process, right? You're looking at a product, you only have one of it in your hand. You see the hologram and you go, okay, this must be authentic. Here's the hologram. And the reason why you say is because you don't have the authentic one in your other hand to compare the level of the hologram. You go, oh, okay, I can see that this is not the real hologram. So a lot of times these overt technologies or features that they've sort of given to the consumer to help identify authentic versus counterfeit, they just fall short. And if anything, they confuse the consumers more. So that's where the need is right now. It's something that the consumers can, with 100% accuracy all the time, instantly know what I've got in my hand is real or what I've got in my hand is fake.
I'm not sure how they're going to tie it together. I know that I've even seen, and actually Joe and I talked about on our NFT podcast episode, that they're tying sometimes, you can get your sneaker and it'll be tied to an NFT, but it's still not going to stop the real world. You're holding a physical object. And by the way, I will tell you on those holograms, I do remember that when starter caps became big, probably in the 90s or 2000s, they had a hologram tag, and the hologram tag was copied, and they had to have an announcement how to tell the difference. Exactly what you said, Dan, how to tell the difference now in the hologram tags. But if you're at that level of abstraction already, then I guess how much of what you're doing is also education?
Well, that's exactly right. And then now you're biting off a whole nother issue. Now, where are you going to get that marketing spend, and how valuable is it to you, and how much effort do you want to put into it? Now you've got the holograms, but you've got confused consumers. And so that's why I think there's a real need. And this is the time now where, consumers need to be able to pick up an item. Especially, it's one thing when you're talking about sneakers, but, start drifting off into other things like baby formula or baby car seats or medication. I mean, these are things you really need to know that it's real and not fake. So,
and again, we're talking about a fun topic, and there are certainly real world implications with products that mean more, especially health and safety products, anything in the area of pharmaceuticals. I actually, now I'm thinking about it that you mention it, but we, in the pharmacy world, which I actually am a former pharmacist, they started to make the pills a certain shape. And it was very hard for to knock it off because of the binders that they use, let's say, to keep the pill together and it didn't crumble. But of course, eventually they cracked that as well.
You're exactly right. And I mean, even just to bring it back to sneakers, if you want, I mean, this problem is so huge right now. You have entire companies that are multi-billion-dollar valuations right now, that the point of differentiation that they offer the consumers, the fact that they can tell you that the product is authentic. Now, I'll question whether they can or not, or how good they are at doing it. But companies like StockX online, I mean, that's where collectors and sneakerheads go to buy these shoes, these sneakers. And it's, why do they go there? Well, because they know it's authentic. And so you got to see that is the difference maker in today's world.
I think also, and I'll tell a personal story. So I'm not going to tell the online website I got it from, but I will say years ago, there was a Dream Team basketball. So the Olympic Dream Team, the original 1992 Dream Team basketball, signed by all of the players, certificate of authenticity, $200. Now, I think that without knowing anything else, I could ask you, was that counterfeit? And of course, it was. So I do think sometimes, there's really no such thing as a free lunch. I do think that a lot of times the consumer who may think they're getting a bargain, it's simply impossible at certain, at certain levels to believe that something is real or authentic.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, my goal here is I can visualize, hopefully in the not too distant future, a time when people will sit back and laugh and they'll sort of be like, do you remember when you used to buy stuff online and not know if it was real or fake? Like you didn't have an idea. How crazy was that? I mean, it's sort of like we do now where we go, like if you and I got into an argument, how old is Larry Bird? If we had this argument in the 80s, the only way for us to settle that argument was to go to a library and take out a book on Larry Bird. Like you
Right.
just can't get that. I mean, it's like, how crazy is that to think of now? Like that's what you would have to do.
I would say I would liken it to the fact that people thought you were crazy for putting your credit card on the internet and buying stuff. When the internet first started, as early as maybe 15 years ago, people weren't really buying stuff. That was something people thought was very risky to do something like that. So it's similar to counterfeit goods, buying them online or not knowing the authenticity of things you're buying. I think that's just going to be the next evolution of things.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, but you're right. My parents still don't want to buy stuff online.
Yeah.
Same. I guess so, Dan, kind of, nearing wrapping it up. I mean, where do you think it's almost an endless game of cat and mouse? It's international espionage, really. Is it a matter of, outsmarting? Is it the technology changing or the tools that you're going to have? A combination of all of those? Where do you see it going?
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think it's all of that, right? And so here's the truth of the matter. You talk about counterfeits, even today, when you talk about counterfeits and just with, the general party conversation, people automatically start thinking about Chanel bags or Louis Vuitton. But the truth of the matter is counterfeits now are so prevalent. They're everywhere that there's margin to be made. An interesting thing, who doesn't really have a bad counterfeit problem? Coca-Cola. Their margins are so thin, there's no room for the counterfeits to get in. So
Okay.
it's not always the most popular brands that are counterfeited. It's the brands that have nice, juicy margins that they can eat into. And actually, we're finding now that a lot of the counterfeiters, they're going away from the more sophisticated companies, and they're going to, hot young companies that probably don't have the maturity to have a full blown out anti-counterfeiting department. And so that's where you're seeing sort of, like you said, the soft underbelly of where counterfeiters are going. And in the way you're picturing is exactly right. I mean, when I go to China, we would go to underground markets that are actually underground. And you go in there and you can't name a brand that they won't have.
Wow.
They make a counterfeit of everything.
Well, this has, I will say, when we stop recording, I will be checking all of my fashion items for sure, as well as some of my collectibles. Joe, I don't think you're going to have that issue because a lot of yours are on the blockchain. So you are kind of protected. Joe, any last thoughts?
No, this was a great episode. I learned a lot. I hope all of our listeners did. And this is a great topic. We could definitely spend a lot more time getting into sneakers because I think we're just scratching the surface of all this.
And Dan, would you come back and we didn't even get into some of your famous brand battles, which we will do.
I would love to come back. I mean, this has been great, guys. I truly appreciate it. It's been fun. And I guess I'm a podcaster now, huh?
You are. you
right.
officially are. You'll be listening to this driving around, in the car, and you'll remember and you'll think it's something, and we'll use it for the next episode. I just want to say we will post in the show notes some of the links to the famous sneakers. I have the Air Jordan trademark registration. We have the Reebok pump patent. There actually was a patent on the inflatable bladder. But until we see you next time, this is Michael Snyder for IP Goes Pop. Thank you for listening, and make sure that what you have is genuine. We will see you next time. We won't actually see you. It's a podcast. Talk to you then.
The IP Goes Pop podcast series is created and produced by Volpe Koenig, an intellectual property law firm based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Visit us at vklaw.com.